Everyone, welcome to another book review Wednesday. Today I'm going to be briefly diving into The Prince and the Pauper by none other than Mark Twain. This is at least one of his more famous works, and I think it's definitely safe to say why that is. It has a lot of interesting concepts and themes that it tries to get across, and it also offers a very interesting story on top of that. So basically, this story is actually interesting in how it combines certain historical figures into sort of a fictionalized version of the time period. So we have Edward Tudor, who is the prince in the story, who was an actual person who was alive. And then we have the pauper, who is named Tom Canty, who is a fictional character. And these two, the prince and the pauper, eventually switch places. In other words, their identities are mistaken, and you will see the circumstances leading up to that. And eventually they sort of end up leading the lives of the other person. And you'll sort of see how eventually it comes around to where they eventually sort of resolve the conflict of the sort of mistaken identity. And it's rather interesting because the pauper comes from a very poor background. His family doesn't even really didn't even want him to begin with. And he definitely has this fictionalized vision in his mind to sort of become a prince, and you sort of see that within the beginning of the story. And eventually he sort of kind of gets his wish. And ultimately, even though he does get his wish, you sort of see the struggles that he has as far as trying to have that kind of position, and in doing so kind of bring a sense of justice and fairness that is something that at least a lot of people come to think about when we think of at least good rulers. And you sort of see too, though, how he ends up having this sort of homesickness, though, and feeling he's sort of out of place. And you also see the struggles that Prince Edward faces being in Tom's position and having to really struggle and come across a lot of really bad people and having to sort of scrape by and deal with abuse as well. So there is a lot of factors here in play, and it's very interesting to see how these two sort of live each other's lives and how it kind of becomes full circle eventually. And I think a lot of the themes that it tries to at least touch upon is this whole concept of sort of identity and class, and how it doesn't really necessarily matter what social status or bracket you're in. You still have various struggles, and you have different ways in which you approach your life that are different than when you are of a different social hierarchy. So you really do see how these two sort of handle that transition, and it's quite fascinating to see. And in doing so, you really get an overall sense of who they are sort of as characters, and it ultimately works. And I think Mark Twain did a really good job of sort of highlighting these various disconnects that can come from being from a different background and not really understanding how a certain class of people kind of operate, or realizing how to deal with certain circumstances that come up. And I think he was, again, sort of trying to bring up to the lack of, I guess, genuine equality and fairness that was sort of lacking, or at least wasn't really, at least the inequality that was there within that period, because you really do see that being a big separation. You know, there wasn't a whole lot of middle class back in the uh, 16th century. At least I believe that's the time period, if I'm not mistaken. But I think bringing that as part of the story really does show you the amount of historical relevance that at least it has as far as being a period piece. And I would definitely recommend it to those who enjoy these kinds of works that focus in on social classes and different brackets of people that are within different uh, sectors as far as wealth is concerned and certain power positions. Also, you know, if you're a big fan of stories like Oliver Twist, um, maybe even A Christmas Carol to a certain extent, I think this is definitely up your alley as far as classic books are concerned, because it does touch upon a lot of similar beats, and in doing so, it provides a very interesting and unique take on these kinds of concepts of what it sort of means to be poor, what it means to have wealth and power, what it means to um, carry out things that are productive and ultimately fair. Uh, and at the end of the day, it's what you come to expect from a story like this and much more. But I think that's really all I can say about it without really giving too much away. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care.